Brick by Brick, where we talk to younger and older members of the LGBTQIA+ community, establishing a timeline of the efforts that have brought us this far, and looking toward the future at the work that still needs to be done. This show is brought to you by One Roof Chicago, a nonprofit organization dedicated to building a queer, intergenerational housing community on Chicago's South Side. My name is Chijoke Williams. I use she, her, hers pronouns, and today we'll be speaking with Jim Harvey, Executive Director of One Roof Chicago and longtime Chicago activist. Welcome back to the show, Jim.
Thank you, Chi. It's good to be back.
Remind us of your pronouns.
He, him, and his.
Fabulous. Well, let's get started. Today we'll be discussing many of the recent executive orders enacted by Trump's administration, how they may or may not mirror past legalization, or rather past legislation, that targeted marginalized groups, and how those groups have historically overcome similar obstacles. So let's start in the present and work our way backwards. A brief primer on the recent executive orders for those who haven't heard. Immediately after his inauguration, Trump signed more than 200 executive actions that put both the country and its most vulnerable citizens at risk. These include issuing pardons for more than 1,500 people convicted for the January 6th insurrection attempt, withdrawing from the Paris Climate Accord and WHO, the World Health Organization, disbanding federal programs on diversity, equity, and inclusion, signing an order to revoke birthright citizenship, and, absurdly, renaming the Gulf of Mexico to the Gulf of America. While the latter may seem silly and petty, and it is, he also enacted several new policies that target trans people specifically. These are all part of the order titled Defending Women from Gender Ideology, Extremism, and Restoring Biological Truth to the Federal Government, which is a mouthful that means nothing. Among its many provisions, get ready, it rolls back protections for trans people in the military, redefines gender at a federal level to only acknowledge binary sex, ends gender-corrected passport programs, blocks incarcerated trans women from being housed in women's prisons, and denies gender-affirming medical care to trans inmates, forcing them to share space with men and endangering their lives, allows and encourages transphobia in the workplace, attempts to block gender-affirming care for trans youth and adults, and blocks federal dollars from being used to aid trans people in any significant way. And this isn't even everything. Many of these policies are left intentionally vague, which allows them to take various prohibitive actions against the trans community as this administration continues. I know, this is a lot, but there's a reason I listed these policies rapid fire all at once. Frankly, this has been what it's been like to be a queer person, to be trans, to be a person of color in the first few weeks of this administration. It's overwhelming to hear all of these horrific changes being encoded into law, to feel specifically targeted by an administration that sees you as nothing but an excuse to promote hate and bigotry, and to be so devastated that we don't even know which policies or ideas to fight first. It's overwhelming. It's more blatant, perhaps, than it has been before. But it's not new. Jim, thank you for your patience as we establish what exactly we're dealing with so far.
Oh, absolutely, Chi. You know, this reminds me of my college days in reading history. And one of the history books that stood out for me was Mein Kampf. Not a history book, but my plan is what it all boiled down to. And just like Adolf Hitler told everyone, told the world, in fact, what he intended to do and attempted to follow through with all of it, you know, this bigot, this fool, this madman, you know, is doing the same thing now and is hell-bent on dividing the community and marginalizing the very best that made this country what it really is, and it's very disturbing. You know, on the way in, I picked up on the latest news item, if you will.
Oh boy.
Yeah, and that is that the Department of Defense has announced that beginning immediately, all observations of Black History Month, which begins tomorrow, and any future plans for Pride Month, for Holocaust Remembrance, and a few others have been banned. So again, we're being marginalized, we're being pushed to the corner by this administration, and the message to all of us is the same, and that is that we've got nowhere to go but up.
I think that's a fantastic way to interpret that, actually. If someone is putting a lot of effort into pushing us down, it makes it quite clear where our priorities are.
That's right.
Ashe. So, I guess, and you've already spoken on this a bit, but my first question is, how much of this is familiar? As an elder queer activist who's been around the block a few times, are you seeing any similarities between past and current bigoted policies?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. I was very active as a teen and young adult in the '60s, right here in Chicago and in other parts of the country, for that matter. And it was amazing that so much of what we're experiencing now mirrors what I experienced years ago, right here in Chicago. The discrimination, the hatred. In those days, I listened, for example, to people talking about communities like Bridgeport, and Homewood on Flossmoor to the south, which are communities that have changed significantly over the years. But if you wandered into Bridgeport in 1962, you might not come out alive. It's not that way now. It's not that way. But what we're experiencing is the creation of an environment that is so much like what it used to be. The hatred, the racism, the discrimination, the sexism, the homophobia, it's all there. It's all there. And so we're repeating so much of what we survived and overcame, 50, 60 years ago.
And again, I appreciate the emphasis on overcoming, because you did make it through. Some of you did make it through.
Some of us did, right?
And I think a lot of the goals of where we are now is going to be on seeing how we can do the same.
Yeah, the challenges are even greater now, because we've got a federal government that is having none of us.
Right.
Is having, all it wants to do is scapegoat, and the number one scapegoat right now are trans people. Number one. Why? Simply because of the fact that it's an easy population, as small as it may be, it's an easy population to get bigoted people, ignorant people, riled up about. These so-called Christians, the evangelicals, the white evangelicals, and that handful of misguided black Christians as well that want to sign on to this. They're not Christians. They're not even religious. They're just bigots hiding behind their versions of the Bible.
It's really interesting that is the one book they're interested in talking about. I guarantee you that any other collection of knowledge bound by paper, they are not quite interested in.
Absolutely. I call it the book of myth and fables. Yeah, and I do, at great risk to a lot of my Christian friends. And I do that because there's so many different interpretations,
of course,
of the Bible.
That's the whole point.
Yeah, and if we rely on individuals that have bigotry at the center of their agenda to interpret it for us, then we're going to continue to wallow in ignorance. Up till the 16th century, people in Europe in particular weren't even allowed to read any version of the Bible. If you were caught reading it, you could lose your life. Why? Because it was being left up to the people who ran the church and had their own agenda to interpret things the way they wanted to.
I think it makes a lot of sense that regardless of the time or the place, if you would like to promote fascism, you lean into ignorance.
Absolutely.
That's generally how that works.
Absolutely.
And so, on that note, Trump's claim that the existence of trans people, literally just the existence of us, and you can tell he means trans women. They never seem to acknowledge trans men in their flimsy arguments. But his claim that trans people's existence endangers the safety of women is a clear strategy to, 1, paint women as helpless and in need of protection, and 2, promote the idea of trans people as a threat in order to justify action against us. I believe there's historical precedent for this sort of strategy, as we were just talking about. Though the groups may differ, the strategies tend to be the same. Beyond the Bible, beyond the 16th century, would you say you've witnessed a similar strategy before in America?
Oh yeah. It's not new. It's not new by any stretch of the imagination. There was a time when, however, when people were marginally accepting, of that small community of trans people, because of the fact that they saw it as odd but entertaining. But as trans people began to speak up for their God-given rights to be accepted
as more than just
drag
or performance.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes.
Then a lot of those people who thought they were being entertained, began to push back, and so they've turned it into a whole culture now of evil and rejection. It's just pure evil. That's what it is.
It also quite reminds me of the whole "won't someone think of the children" kind of thing.
Yeah.
They'll pick an audience, or rather a group of people that most people seem to think is weak for whatever reason. Right now, it's trans people endangering women. I think for the last maybe 50 to 60 years, it was queer people being a danger to children in no way that they could prove or point to. And it is just the same old playbook. It's to the point that it's quite transparent and not even very creative. Yeah,
I remember this fascist during his campaign was talking about children going to school in the morning, as being cisgendered, and coming home in the evening, wearing a dress. Give me a break.
If transition was that easy, if transition was that smooth, I can think of far more people. Well, don't even get me started.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's, ironically, they are simultaneously making it so much harder to be trans, so much harder to live our truth and live our lives, while saying that we are spreading this ideology, spreading it as if it is a virus and a disease, and not something that is often inherent in people that have to discover it in themselves rather than it being thrust upon them.
Well, the basis of it all is fear-mongering.
Of course.
And it's fear-mongering that actually has no basis. It has no foundation. But if you're not willing to ask the hard questions and seek the truth for yourself, then it's very easy to be led down the garden path, out of fear and out of ignorance, and end up where we are right now, with this kind of vitriol being spewed, out of his mouth and these idiots that he's getting appointed to cabinet positions. It's just frightening.
It's quite frightening, especially because I think, historically speaking, when we see precedent for these sort of things, there was definitely, obviously, hate. There was a lot of ignorance directed towards gay people, lesbians, all of these things. However, it was not necessarily as blatant on a federal level, as you were just saying.
That's right.
And so I think another thing we're trying to figure out as a community is how to make it through, how to survive, how to continue finding joy. You're living proof that it is possible to live through a hostile administration and even to thrive afterward. So can you share some wisdom with us, Jim? How do you move forward and find joy in a time like this? Who do we lean on when things feel this dire?
I think we lean on one another. We lean on one another, and we also, despite what they try to do to cut us off from our history, we bring that history forward. And we share that history with anybody and everybody that's willing to listen and that needs to listen. That's what we do. The one thing that that I think that they're succeeding in doing is pushing us closer together. They're forcing many of us who never imagined that I'd find my way to you and you'd find my way to me. We're doing it because of the fact that they're hurting so many of us. And as we learn the truth and we look just across the table, just across the street, just across the way at our places of employment or even our places of worship, and we see other people that may look like us and may not look like us, we find our way to one another and we bind ourselves together, and we're going to win this battle. We're going to win this battle. They're pushing us together, and we have no choice but to win.
It's true. And on that note, I'd like to shout out a few different groups and organizations in Chicago that might help us to come together right now. I'm talking One Roof Chicago, Affinity, Brave Space Alliance, Center on Halsted, Life is Work, Ignite. Honestly, any group of people that is promoting solidarity, any group of folks who are helping Black, brown, queer, all of these groups, because not only are we being targeted, not only are we already marginalized, it is going to come to a point, it feels as if it is already coming to a point, where the only people we can lean on are each other, as you were saying. And yet, we have the resources. We have the teachers. We have the craftsmen and women. We have the educators. We have the historical archives, also the Gerber Hart Archives on Clark. The Intergenerational Dialogue Project really promotes the fact that, like yourself, we have people who have lived through this before. We have people who have made it through and thrived and have lost friends and seen what happened to them and how those things were so difficult to make it through and so difficult to lose people we loved. But we also now have gleaned knowledge from that and can maybe think about how to prevent it from happening again.
Sure. I think about the fact that just a few months ago we were watching a story about Bayard Rustin.
Martin Luther King's scriptwriter.
Exactly. The architect of the March on Washington in 1963.
And a gay Black man.
And a gay Black man. And I recall in 1963 how he was maligned by so many people, particularly a lot of the Black ministers who were behind the scenes and trying to destroy him. And he was able to go ahead and make things happen. But it took years for us to get to a point where we could celebrate this brilliant man, celebrate this committed and dedicated man. And now, it's easy to talk about Bayard Rustin. It's very easy to talk about him now because he's been accepted for the value that he brought to this struggle. And there's so many others out here now, maybe even me, who brought, who are bringing value to this struggle. And it's a struggle that, that's crossing so many lines, but there's room. There's room at the table for all of us. And we're crowding around that table because we've got a fight on our hands.
And the table is ever expanding.
Absolutely.
So, I suppose that leaves us with, do you have a final message for us, Jim? Having made it through, having seen what we need, having seen what we didn't have before, but perhaps do now, what do you want to leave the audience with?
When I look back on the elections of people like the late Jimmy Carter and people like Barack Obama, and people like Joe Biden, and the almost election of Kamala Harris, and know that we were almost there. We were about to enshrine some of the most beautiful things about this country and about this world, enshrine them in history.
Yeah.
We're almost there. And I talk to some people who, in my generation in particular, who, and rightly so, they say, I'm just tired. I'm tired. And I'm tired. And so many of us are tired. Many people in your generation are tired.
We are.
We're tired. But It reminds me of a song we used to sing in the old freedom movement.
Okay.
You know, and the line is so important. We who believe in freedom cannot rest. You know, I believe in freedom. I still believe in freedom. And I know with the fight ahead of us, I still cannot rest. Don't you rest.
I love that. Thank you. And I think that is so valuable. We cannot take this lying down. We have to stand up for ourselves, for our own communities, for our peers, and for every other community being targeted right now by this administration.
That's right.
And so that's what I'd like to leave you with. You deserve to be taken care of. You deserve to take care of yourself. Your loved ones deserve to be taken care of. No matter what this administration is saying about you, no matter how they try to represent you, you know your value. You know you are not what they say you are. We stand with you. We will not take these changes lying down. We will make space for you. And you are not alone. That may be the most important thing to remember right now. Whether black, brown, an immigrant, queer, or trans, they want you to feel isolated, hopeless, too off balance to fight back. But you are not alone.
That's right.
Whatever they try to take from us, we still have each other. And we always will. Thank you for watching. Be safe, and let's look out for each other. Thank you, Jim.
Thank you.